In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful.
The conflicts in Masjid al-Aqsa and the surrounding lands have been on the agenda of the world for many years. Although the effects of these conflicts sometimes diminish, saddening news continues to come from this region almost every day. Especially in the last days of the month of Ramadan, the dose of Israel's attacks against Muslims in Gaza increases. Hundreds of Muslims are martyred and their homes demolished, especially before Eid al-Fitr, causing this day of celebration to pass in grief. What is the historical background? The State of Israel is a gift of imperialist exploitation in return for large sums of payments made by the Zionists. In 1917, with the Balfour Declaration, the British Foreign Minister sent a letter to the Zionist leader, Lord Rothschild, and promised that a Jewish state would be established in the Palestinian territories. Once again, it was the British Foreign Minister who made this promise, and despite the promised land belonging to the Palestinians, nobody felt the need to regard them. The Palestinian people were not even given the chance to voice their opinion on the matter. Britain, with an imperialist attitude, offered Palestinian land to the wealthy Zionists. Since this date, the number of Jews immigrating from different parts of the world to Palestinian lands have been increased. In 1922, the Muslim population corresponded to approximately 600,000, whilst the Jewish population was around 80,000. And despite this overall majority of the Palestinian people, in 1937, the United Nations considered a proposal to divide the country into two. However, they were not satisfied. In 1948, it was decided to establish a state of Israel for them, at a time where every region in Palestine was still mostly populated by Palestinians. The UN and Britain, which hold the authority in their hands, have never mentioned the necessity of a Palestinian state. Wilson principles, which the USA has been boasting of, were violated, and no contribution was made to the establishment of a self-governing state for the Palestinians. And attempts made to establish a self-governing Palestine were constantly prevented. After 1948, blood and tears have not subsided, and the illegitimate state of Israel has continued to shed the blood of Muslims. Deir Yassin, Al-Khalil Mosque, Sabra and Shatila massacres are just some of them. The Palestinians, on the other hand, continue to resist this occupation and ethnic cleansing with their stones. This reveals the extent of Israel's imperialist ambitions. Opposing the two-state solution proposed by many of the world countries, the illegitimate Zionist state of Israel has also tried to convince the world that Palestine does not exist through declaring Jerusalem as its capital in 2017. In July 2018, the illegitimate state of Israel officially defined itself as the state of the Jewish nation and removed the states of Arabic as its second official language. During the same period, they justified the seizure of Palestinian homes and handing of these to Zionist settlers as national interest, once again revealing their arrogance, which they have tried to conceal. The illegitimate state of Israel is an apartheid and Zionist state. In fact, one of the first people to use the word apartheid in relation to Israel was their first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion. Following the 1967 June War, he warned of Israel becoming an apartheid state if it retained control over the occupied territory, which it has done. The situation as it stands today: all regions of Palestine are under Zionist Israeli control, except Gaza. Palestinians constitute most of the population, yet are under Israeli law, and in practice, Jewish Israelis and Palestinians are treated differently in almost every aspect of life, including housing, education, health, employment, family, life, residence, and freedom of movement. Dozens of Israeli laws and policies institutionalize this prevailing system, of racial discrimination and domination. Segregation is carried out by implementing separate legal regimes for Jewish Israelis and Palestinians living in the same area. In the occupied West Bank, Jewish Israeli settlers living in illegal settlements are governed by Israeli civil law, while Palestinians also living in the West Bank are governed by Israeli military law. In Israel itself, there exists no Israeli nationality shared by all citizens. Rather, citizens are divided into national categories of Jewish, which affords them a set of rights and privileges above the other categories, or Arab, with comparatively restricted rights and privileges. This separation was reiterated when Israel passed a national state law in 2018, essentially consolidating decades of discrimination and enshrining two classes of citizens in law. Israel carries out various acts that are prohibited by the UN Apartheid Convention, including forcible transfer of Palestinians to make way for illegal Israeli settlements, preventing Palestinians from returning to their homes and lands, including millions of refugees living in exile, systematic and severe deprivation of fundamental human rights of Palestinians based on their identity, denying Palestinians their right to freedom of movement and residence, especially but not limited to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, murder, torture, unlawful imprisonment, and other severe deprivation of physical liberty, persecution of Palestinians as a result of opposing apartheid. Why has the world been so irresponsive? Israel's apartheid policies over the Palestinian people are only possible because of international support.
You know, I used to say early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
Governments fail to hold Israel to account, while corporations across the world profit from involvement in Israeli settlements, or Israel's militarized repression of the Palestinian people. Because those in power refuse to act to stop this injustice, responses have been mainly through Palestinian and other civil societies. Example of this is the call to boycott Israeli products, to show solidarity with the Palestinian struggle for freedom, justice and equality. Superpowers and organizations which shape the global economy are either directly or indirectly serving for the existence of the Zionist state. Nevertheless, Palestinians have continued to resist, as any other option would mean to accept establishment of the illegitimate state of Israel. Actions we can take to support the Palestinian cause include sending financial aid, providing humanitarian aid, medical necessities and personnel, applying full-scale boycott and blockade to the enemy, raising the issue in written, visual and social media, creating a social atmosphere, carrying out effective demonstrations. Everyone should take responsibility. In conclusion, cruelty, and all that rest their foundations on cruelty, cannot be long-lasting. Palestinians and all other Muslims and every person with appreciation of even basic human rights will continue to stand up against Israel, which has been trying to survive through unlawful acts since the day it was declared. The illegitimate Zionist state of Israel is doomed to collapse. Allah knows the best. All praise to Him. There is no greater conqueror than Allah.